Hi guys, it's Oli from Rad Season. I'm excited today to be joined by Chip Conley, who is the strategic advisor to Airbnb. He's also the founder of Modern Elder Academy. Chip, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you.
And whereabouts are you at the moment, Chip?
I'm in the southern Baja Peninsula in Mexico. So just below California, there is a long strip of land that is goes from San Diego all the way to Cabo San Lucas, and I'm down near the bottom of that peninsula where our Modern Elder Academy MEA is located.
Right, and what's the situation over there at the moment?
It's actually relatively safe. Mexico definitely has had major outbreaks, but our peninsula is almost like an island, and so we haven't had serious problems. But we do get a lot of Americans who come down here, and so the American problem is a little bit of a Mexico problem as a result. But yeah, we had to close in mid-March, and we reopened in October. And yeah, it's been fascinating to see all of this happen in 5 months, staying in place here in this rural fishing and farming village, on the beach, where there are many days where I don't look at any social media or any media at all, and I wouldn't know that there was a problem in the world. But if I go into town here, and the town's a small town, everybody has masks on.
Right.
But most of, we're in nature, so we just don't, you don't notice it.
Okay, well that's good. I guess I'd love to take it back to where you got into hospitality and how did that all begin?
So when I was 26 years old, I'd spent the prior few years learning how to become a commercial real estate developer. And I was fascinated by hotels. I didn't have any background in it, I'd never gone to hotel school. I was trying to convince the owner the president and CEO of our company to create a hotel division that I would be running at age 25 or 26. And he laughed at me. And so instead, I decided to start my own company. And I didn't have a lot of money, so I bought a broken down motel, a pay-by-the-hour motel in a bad neighborhood in San Francisco. And I learned the business. I called the company Joie de Vivre, and it means joy of life in French. And we went on to create 52 boutique hotels over the next 24 years while I was founder and CEO of that company before I sold it. It's now a Hyatt brand. Mm-hmm. And that was 10 years ago that I sold it.
And how did you, I guess being pretty young at the time, being 25 and starting that off, I mean, how did you grow it from taking it from that first motel and then expanding from there?
What was interesting to me was there's certain areas where I had a natural talent and other areas I just didn't. And where I had the natural talent was in concepting and the creation of the boutique hotels, each with its own identity and brand and name and personality and design. So I was pretty good at that, and I put together a great team there. We had our own in-house interior design, in-house branding, etc. Where I wasn't as good is just the operations side. I didn't have any background in hotels, and running a hotel is like a marathon. It's definitely not a 100-meter dash. And so bringing together a team of people and then creating a culture. I'm just a huge believer in the importance of culture as a strategic differentiator for a company. So I studied some companies that I thought had great cultures. I went out and talked to the CEOs of those companies, just as this young guy, just saying, hey, I want to learn how you created a great culture. And fortunately, I was able to create a great culture for my company. We had 3,500 employees, and we won all kinds of awards for culture. And the culture is the thing that actually keeps your organization in a good place in a difficult time. And so it's a very relevant subject right now, given how difficult the times are in many industries, especially in the industry that I know best, which is travel and hospitality.
And would you say, like, with that culture, is that just surrounding yourself and bringing on the right team that would like build that culture, or they would fit into kind of what you're?
It's definitely, I think it's a very democratic process. So I don't think it's like just Chip making the decision. The best way to describe it is if I were to ask you, Oli, what's your personality, and you came up with 5 adjectives to define your personality, let's say aspirationally, they might be different aspirationally than who you are. That would be what a great company would do. They would say, what is our brand? What's our culture? What are the 5 adjectives that aspirationally define that? And then if we were going to go out and ask our customers or our employees, what are the 5 adjectives that define us? What would they say? And then you look at the disparity, and you start asking the question, what's the bridge that's going to get you from where you are to where you want to be in terms of those qualities. And you start to develop programs and even leadership habits that help the leaders and line level people to live into that. So for our company, we were a funky, creative, humble company that really and that was sort of a little bit quirky in how we lived and operated. And once you have a culture that's pretty clear, you create an environment where people are attracted to it, and so you end up attracting people who appreciate that culture. So I wrote a lot about this in a book called Peak: How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow. And so if somebody wants to learn more about my perspective on culture and why my company won a lot of awards on culture, read that book, because actually that's the book that led me to joining Airbnb, because the founders of Airbnb in their early days had read my book Peak, and they said, we want this company, our company Airbnb, to be as culture focused as Chip's company was. So they reached out to me and said, will you join us and help us democratize hospitality?
That's cool. And so you ran that was 24 years that you were running the company.
Yeah.
After that, did you just think, okay, you know what, like I can retire now, I don't really need to work? I mean, what were you thinking at the time? Or you still wanted to do something different? Or
there's a famous movie called The Intern with Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway, and it's sort of a popular movie. And in the movie, De Niro says, musicians don't retire, they quit when there's no more music left inside of them. So I knew I didn't want to retire. I knew I had music left inside of me. I just wasn't sure who to share it with. And that's about the time before Airbnb came along that I started working on this festival idea, this Fest 300 idea. You want me to talk about that?
That would be great, yeah.
So I'd had a long fascination with festivals. I was one of the founding members of the Burning Man board, for those who know the Burning Man Festival, and I've been going to Burning Man for 20 years at that point. And I'd gone to a lot of other festivals too. What I was curious about, I was 49, 50 years old, and I was curious about the fact that there are festival communities that have developed, but there wasn't a particular website that I felt was the best website in the world. This is what, 9 years ago that I was looking into this. That was sort of like the website allowed you to discover the festivals you wanted to go to. And my interest in festivals was not specific to transformational festivals like Burning Man or music festivals, but it was everything from religious pilgrimages to film festivals, food festivals, arts and cultural festivals, etc. And so what I was intrigued by was the fact that the more digital we got, the more ritual we seemed to need. And the ritual was in the form of festival. And so I put together a team of festival fanatics, and we created a website called Fest 300 with the intent of creating an annual list of the 300 best festivals in the world. So in the business world, there's a Fortune 500 list and a Forbes 400 list of the 400 richest people in the world, but there was no festival list. So we created a Fest 300 list. And for a few years there, we had an annual list. And one year in particular, I went to 36 festivals in 20 countries. And then ultimately, we merged it with a company called Everfest. But, you know, to be quite frank, the business model for all of that was difficult.
Yeah.
And along the way, you know, very early into me launching that business, that's when the Airbnb founders came along, and I had to go leap into that, and I really couldn't run the business, so I had to have someone, my partner, run the business.
Okay, and doing, like, when you were running it, like, are there any sort of standout festivals that you thought, okay, like, I know they're probably they're quite different if you're covering all these different things, like, you know, like food and so cultural events, music. But is there any sort of standout as, you know, the quirkiest?
The quirkiest? So there's lots of different standards here. The quirkiest festivals, I've gone to a bunch of them. I mean, and you spend some time. You live in Portugal a lot of the time, Oli, and it's near Spain. And I think the three countries in the world that have the most robust festival cultures, India is number one, Spain is number two, and surprisingly, Japan is number three. So when it comes to Spain, Spain has a lot of quirky festivals. One of my favorite quirkiest festivals of all time is El Calacho, which is a festival most people in Spain have never heard of, don't know about. It's near Burgos, Spain. It's a festival that's gone on for 400 years in a row, in a tiny village of 500 people. But it covers a large, I don't know, maybe a 50 square kilometer area. Any child that has been born in the last year gets laid out on a mattress that goes through the town. And these two guys dressed like devils who are drinking all day, drink, and then they jump over these mattresses full of babies. And there's a Scottish bagpiper, and there's the Catholic priest, because it's a pagan Catholic festival. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen, but I loved it because it was sort of like being in a Fellini movie or some weird surreal film on mushrooms, because you had everybody from the 85-year-old deacon of the church to obviously the 1-year-olds, but you had this weird mix of people, and then maybe a total of about 50 spectators, of which I was one of them. So that's El Calacho. That's a strange festival. There's also a festival in Spain, the pilgrimage of the near-death experience. So anybody who's ever had an NDE, which is basically going to the other side and coming back, and I am one of those people, which happened to me when I was 47 years old. It's basically people being put in coffins, open coffins, and being carried through the streets of this northwest Spain city, not too far from Portugal. And basically you're opening yourself up to still being alive. Spain has a lot of weird festivals. Partly, I think, also La Tomatina, which is the tomato. So, my favorite festivals, I would say if I had a top 3 to 5, Burning Man's obviously one of those. Maha Kumbh Mela, which is 100 million people at a festival. It's 55 days long every 12 years. Every 3 years they do a smaller one with 40 million people. It's at the Ganges River in India. It's the largest, gathering of humanity ever. That was fascinating. That was like Burning Man on steroids, because it's basically these little camps with Hindu gurus in charge of each camp. I love the New Orleans Jazz Festival, Jazz and Heritage Festival, because it's just such a interesting community experience of how it just taps into New Orleans. I love Il Palio, which happens twice each summer in Siena, Italy, which is basically like a medieval, bareback horsebacking race through the streets of Siena. What else? I mean, there's just so many. And of course, then there's Boom in Portugal. There's Secret Garden used to be a really big thing in England, not as much as it used to be today, I would say. But it's a tough. Well, let's just be real frank right now. It's a very difficult business to be in. If my company Fest 300 had survived and been a successful website for festivals, it would no longer have survived at this point, because it's really sad to see the festival culture not in a place where they can live in the IRL world, the in real life world.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting what happens, obviously, later in the year and then next year, to see, where, I mean, a lot of these festivals have been going, especially the sort of some of the quirky ones and the strange ones have been going on for like hundreds of years, so
those ones, the ones that have been going on for a long time and they don't necessarily have a financial or commercial reason for being, they're more likely to last than the ones that are built on a infrastructure of sponsorships and things like that.
Yeah. Are you still involved with Burning Man, or?
Yeah, I mean, I stepped away from the board about a year ago, a little bit less than a year ago, but I'm still pretty involved in certain ways. I helped buy the Fly Ranch property, which is right next to the Burning 10 miles away from the Burning Man site, which is really the long-term site for what Burning Man's going to do. And yeah, so I'm still moderately involved, and it certainly introduced me to festival producers and aficionados all over the world, because they would come to Burning Man, and I was in First Camp, which is where the founders camp was, and I was a founding board member, and I was probably the most active board member, and really I was and I still am the mentor to the CEO, Marion Goodell. So yeah, it's been a great experience. I'm definitely less active than I used to be.
And so after Fest 300, and you're approached by the founders of Airbnb, and you what was your position, and what was the intention there? What did they want you to?
So they approached me because
they
were the three founders of Airbnb they had a small tech startup, and they were calling it at that point it had moved from Airbed and Breakfast to Airbnb, and it was growing fast. So before I got there, it was growing fast. So I didn't have much to do with having it in the early days get some growth trajectory, but it was still a very much niche business. It was oriented toward millennials on budget travel in the top 20 urban markets in the world. And so I came along as the only person in the company with a travel industry or hospitality background, the only person who had an entrepreneurship background beyond tech. And Brian, the co-founder and CEO, said, "I want you to be my in-house mentor." And so for 4 full-time years, I was the head of global hospitality and strategy, which meant I was in charge of all the hosts globally. I was in charge of the strategy for the company. I was in charge of business development, business travel, learning and development, landlord partnerships, you name it. And it was great. And I had to realize that I was as much an intern as I was a mentor, because I'd never worked in a tech company before. I was 52 years old and had spent pretty much my whole career in real estate development / hospitality, and didn't know a damn thing about the tech world. So I learned as much from Brian, even though he was my mentee, as he did from me. But he was also my boss. He was 21 years younger than me, and he was my boss because he was the CEO. So it was a fascinating experience. It's what they started calling me, the modern elder in the company, who's as curious as they are wise. And that's really when I started to realize, okay, wow, we have a world that where we're gonna live longer. Power seems to be moving younger, and the world is changing faster. And those three variables have a lot of people in midlife pretty confused and bewildered, and maybe feeling irrelevant. And that's what ultimately led me to writing the most recent book I wrote, my 5th book, called Wisdom at Work: The Making of a Modern Elder. And I initially, when I heard them calling me modern elder, I was like, fuck you. I don't want to be a modern elder. Excuse me. But I was like, I don't want to be a modern elder. That sounds like a really old person. But the difference between elderly and elder is the following. Elderly is the last 5 or 10 years of your life, no matter who you're surrounded by. But when you're an elder, it has nothing to do with your age. It has everything to do with who you're surrounded by compared to your age. So it's a relative term. And so in the world of Airbnb, where I was twice the age of the average employee, I was an elder, even though I wasn't elderly. And so I owned my modern elderhood, and ultimately became for 3.5 years now, I've been an advisor, but for 4 years, really deeply enmeshed in how I helped the founders and our leadership team steer the rocket ship during a time of very rapid growth, and also during a time when we were, a controversial company, especially in my home industry, hospitality.
Yeah.
You can imagine, it's like I had people say to me, first of all, why would you ever join that company? Like, first of all, they said to me, I've never heard of that company. What the hell do they do? Then they heard what it did, and it's like, why would you join that company? And that sounds like a stupid idea. And then thirdly, like a year or two later, there was like, hey, you guys, we hate you. We don't, Airbnb sucks. And then a year later, I started getting their resumes, because they realized we were onto something.
Yeah.
So, and it's what's been really interesting, Oli, is that in this pandemic, everybody in travel and everybody in lodging and accommodations, hotels, hospitality, everybody's gotten devastated. But what's really fascinating right now is how fast Airbnb has recovered. Airbnb's weekly booking for the last 3 or 4 weeks has been equal to what it was a year ago. Marriott is not even close. And that's partly because that people are seeking safe spaces where they can go in and clean it themselves. They don't need to have a maid. They want a lot of space, less money, and they want to be, frankly, outside the cities. And so long story short is it's really interesting to see Airbnb recovering like it is. And I'm proud of Brian, who's almost like my son in terms of how he has managed, through a very difficult time.
Yeah. And would you see is that mostly coming from domestic travel, or is that international as well?
Yeah, it's mostly domestic. Obviously in Europe, people cross borders a lot more than they do in the United States, but it is definitely more US. It's more people within 300 miles or 300 kilometers of their home. So, and people are staying longer. So instead of people going and doing a 4-day trip, they're doing a 4-week trip. And they're saying, I'm decamping from my home. We as a family are going to go and live, out there in the Black Forest. So, it's been fascinating. And I would just say that, and what was interesting for me in my early days at Airbnb is my festival background was really well suited for Airbnb. And I was able to make a lot of connections in the festival world with Airbnb because, when there's a festival happening in a place, it often creates a housing, or not just a housing shortage, but a hotel/lodging shortage. And so we needed to figure out how to address that supply need, as well as all the regulatory needs that Airbnb needed to start to focus on in the communities in which people were renting their homes out.
It's a good fit. I mean, when I went traveling with my family around Europe last summer, we went to 25 festivals, and we were using Airbnb the majority of the time. I got a 2-year-old, and I was thinking, okay, well, I could camp with him and my wife at some of these festivals, and we could just jump and go on an Airbnb down the road.
If you can afford it. I mean, obviously camping's probably cheaper, but it's certainly a little easier. So what are your top 3 or 4 festivals from that sojourn?
So from that trip last year, we went to this trumpet festival in Serbia called Guja. And that was wild. It was like in this village in the middle of nowhere, and every August for 3 days, they get all the trumpet players from across the Balkans and within Serbia. They all go there, and they just have this massive party, and then they have like a big trumpet competition at the end. And I've never seen or heard anything like it. That was pretty good. And then we went to an incredible one in Spain called Cascamoras, which is where they get covered in olive oil. Yes. And that's on 2 separate days. Again, sort of around religion for that one, like a lot of these Spanish festivals.
How about the tower? Did you ever go to the tower one where the people are building the human towers?
We were going to go to the plan. Well, the initial plan in January was to go to one festival a month and just drive to them over from Portugal. So we were thinking, I was looking at Colacho, baby jumping, and
yes. You're one of the few people who know it exists. That's amazing.
I was just like, this looks, this is too crazy to actually, be true. I want to see it for myself, sort of thing. So,
another one you should go to is the cheese roll. It's in England.
We went to that as well last year.
Oh, I love this. I love it. Yeah, that Cooper's Hill. That's a strange one. That's a scary one. Oh my God, I saw a guy dislocate his leg. Right down there. Yeah.
Did you do it or no?
You know what? I actually ran up the hill, and then after I ran up the hill, I was like, I'm not running down the hill. No, I walked down the hill. But dude, I'm, at that time I was 53 years old. I was like, I don't think so.
It's pretty steep, isn't it? I remember like walking through the field.
Not just steep. It's actually like moguls. It's not seeing the dips that makes it crazy. so worth watching a video of that. If if those who are listening or watching want to go and find, it's called the Cooper's Hill cheese roll, and in Gloucester, England. Yeah.
And that was this year they couldn't. It wasn't on, obviously, with COVID, but they did do a sort of ceremonial cheese roll. So one person actually goes up there and rolls the cheese. He went up there and he rolled the cheese down, just with no with no people watching. But yeah, I couldn't believe there was like a couple of thousand people on the hill watching, and I was taking photos right at the bottom and just trying to dodge the people and the cheese when it was rolling down.
You didn't go down.
I didn't know. It was going to be the first event of the 25. So I thought, I saw videos before and I was like,
yeah. If it's the first, you don't want to mess it up so that you can't go anywhere else. Yeah. So that's that.
And there was people.
Have you been to Boom?
I haven't, no.
Yeah. Okay. So when I think of Portugal, that's what I think of. So.
Okay. Yeah. So there's so many to it's kind of endless. So we sort of look at whenever I go to one and then discover another one. There was one in Wales called Bog Snorkeling World Championships.
Yes, I know that one too. I've not been to it, but yeah.
That was pretty fun. I took part in that, and they had a couple of hundred people there. I think that maybe about, I don't know how many people entered, maybe like 70 or 80 or something. But that was wild, and it's just in a bog in a field in Wales, and in the middle of nowhere, and but a really good sort of community feel, and everyone's just having a good time. Half the people there are sort of competing and trying to do a fast time. The other half are in fancy dress, and you get like a prize for the wackiest fancy dress, and that was good. So now with the Modern Elder Academy, I mean, what are you doing there? What's happening?
So when I left a full-time role at Airbnb, I started writing my book, and I live part-time down here in Mexico, and so I have a home on the beach. And one day I went for a run on the beach, and as I was running, I had this idea, which was like, why is there not a school or an academy for people in midlife to help them to mine their mastery and repurpose themselves, for the second half of their adult life. Mm-hmm. And it was a fascinating thought, because it was like, okay, let's create the world's first midlife wisdom school. And so within 6 months, I built the campus. It all happened very quickly. And we started in the first half of 2013, the Modern Elder Academy, with 153 people going through the program, either a 1 week or a 2 week program, in cohorts, and got really good feedback about it. And that led me to making a decision that I think we should do this full time and make it a program open to the public. And so it opened in November 2018. We've had 750 people from 24 countries go through it. And the basic premise is this, we go through all kinds of transitions in midlife. And I define midlife quite broadly, 35 to 75. So Oli, you're I don't know if you're quite in midlife yet, but you're not.
I'm 38, so yeah.
Okay, so you're in midlife. You're there. We've actually had people as young as 30. We've had people from as young as 30 and as old as 88. But 35 to 75 is what I consider midlife, which is a very broad perspective of midlife. And what we've really been able to see is that people have come here and learned how to navigate the transitions that people have in midlife, whether that's at some point you'll be an empty nester. Your son, is it your son? Yes. Yeah. Your son will leave, and you might have another child. You have one child, correct?
Just one. Yeah.
Okay. You might have, who knows, if you have more, they'll have an empty nest at some point. You'll have your parents pass away. You'll change your career. All kinds of things happen in midlife. And so what we are seeing is that people don't really have much in the way of schools, tools, or support to help them through what's next for them, not just in their career, but just in life. And yes, we're closed right now because of the pandemic, but we reopen in October, and about half the people who come are on some form of scholarship we give them, because we believe pretty, deeply that wisdom is not taught, it's shared. So having a really diverse cohort of 18 people together from all over the world with all kinds of backgrounds really enriches the sense of, cultivating and harvesting wisdom. So yeah, it's great. I like being a pioneer. I was a boutique hotel pioneer. I was a home sharing pioneer, and now I'm a wisdom school pioneer. And yeah, it's been very gratifying.
Nice. And you're also learning Spanish and learning surfing, I've heard as well, right?
Learning to surf, yes. So one of the things that we really help people to see is how much of their adult life is still ahead of them. I have a quick story here, which is that my dad and I go scuba diving, and my dad, is 83 later this summer, and he's been scuba diving since he's 60, and he's now done 2,800 dives around the world. So he's very avid scuba diver. I became a scuba diver in my mid to later 50s, and we were scuba diving in Indonesia a couple of years ago, and I went onto one of these online websites to try to actually figure out how long I was going to live. It was like a longevity site. And I put all my inputs in, and it said I was going to live till age 98. So my dad and I are going off to go scuba diving for the morning. And on the boat, I said to my dad, "How long are you going to live, Dad?" I didn't tell him what I'd done. I didn't tell him I'd done the survey. And he said, "Chip, I'm going to live till I'm 98. And I said, "Wow, that's interesting. I just found out I'm going to live till I'm 98. And then my dad said, "Let's do the math." And this is really interesting. My dad said, "Let's do the math." And my dad said, "Listen, if I'm now," at that point he was 80, "if I'm 80 and I'm going to live till 98, I have just entered the fourth quarter of my adult life if I start counting at age 18. So, and for me, I was 57 at that time. And so I was not even, if I was going to live till 98, I was not even at halftime yet. I was not halfway through my adult life of 80 years if you go from age 18 to 98. And so we are not reinforced by society to try new things after about age 45.
Yeah.
And yet here I was at age 57 realizing I'm not even halfway through my adult life. So why not take up Spanish or surfing? One of the questions I think we need to ask ourselves constantly is, what do we know now that we wish we knew 10 years ago? Okay, you'll come up with that answer. That's an interesting, provocative question, huh? Now, take that question and apply it to your next 10 years.
Yeah.
What is it 10 years from now that you wish you had learned now? Think 10 years from now. What could you say to yourself 10 years from now that you wish you'd learned today? And then why didn't you start learning it today? And so for me, Spanish was a real obvious one on this one because I live in Mexico a lot of the time, and I learned French. It led to Joie de Vivre being the name of my company. So learning Spanish makes sense. Okay, yeah. That one's obvious. Surfing's less obvious, but yeah, I live on a surfing beach, and I'm 59 now. If I don't learn now, learning at 69 is going to be harder than learning at 59. So yes, let's at least learn. And if there's a lesson to all of this, it's to have fun.
Yeah.
And one other thought. Part of the reason I got fascinated by festivals is I've spent my last 10 years or so believing in a guy named Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker passed away a few years ago in his mid-90s, but he was the most famous management theorist in history. And he wrote 2/3 of his 40 books after the age of 65. He believed down to his toes the following: every 2 years, go study a subject that you're passionate about that has nothing to do with your career. And what it will serve as being that curiosity will serve as an elixir for life. And so every 2 years, I find a subject, whether it's festivals or emotions or the subject of aging, that has nothing to do with my career. Sometimes it leads to me creating a company like Fest 300, or writing a book, or starting an academy. So, but I don't do it for that. I don't go out and do this. I studied hot springs, a few years ago. Well, that didn't turn into anything other than the fact that, I love hot springs even more. And I'm a hot springs aficionado. But that process of learning and getting curious is a really valuable way to stay fresh in your life.
Mm. I completely agree. I mean, I was surfing. I'm a keen surfer, and I've been ever since I was 18. First started then, and then would try and go as much as I could. And then the pandemic happened, and they banned surfing in Portugal. So I was like, okay, well, what do you can't go in the sea. So then, I thought, okay, well, like pick up the mountain bike again, and then got really into that. And then, I'm not great at either, but it's just good to learn and try and, do something new. And I think, now I studied Spanish at university, and then we live in Portugal. We've got to learn Portuguese, so that's next. And yeah, it's good to sort of think about it when you like when you say when you put it in 10 years, every 10 years, like what is next, and it's kind of it's endless, right? And there's so many things.
How do you when you compare Portugal to Spain? How do you what do you think's what are the distinguishing features of Portugal versus Spain?
I think, I don't know, like when we first moved to Portugal, I was going to Spain ever since I was a baby. My dad's business was over there, so we're kind of going regularly from the UK. So I had spent quite a bit of time in Spain and didn't know much about Portugal. Just thought, okay, well, it's this strip next to Spain, quite a bit smaller, but there's so much going for it that it's completely own separate culture and identity. And the people have been really welcoming. And there's obviously with the Latin similarities there than the sort of the Brits and the Northern Europeans. But yeah, I think I don't know, they both got good weather. For me, the main reason was the location of Lisbon, where we are having like a big city where you can live on the beach, which has perfect surf. I don't think there's many. It's probably San Diego, Cape Town, Lisbon, San Sebastian, maybe in Spain, but there's only a handful of cities that have that. So you got the buzz of being somewhere in a capital, but then it's right on the beach. So yeah.
Nice.
That's it. Is there any one last festival question? Actually, is there anything that you're still looking to do? Festival, like an event or a festival that you'd like to go to that you haven't been to?
That's a great question, because there are a lot of festivals that I haven't done yet, that once I dove into Airbnb, I just didn't have time for. There's a bunch of festivals in Japan that are sort of interesting, but I don't remember the names of them. Gosh, no, I can't think of I can't think of anything right now, other than to say that I someday will go to Coachella when I'm really old and wrinkled. It's not been a high priority, but I have so many friends who've gone there and sort of laughed at me because I'm the festival guy who's never gone to Coachella, who grew up in California, and just so. I'd like to go to Glastonbury. I've never actually done Glastonbury. And,
no, me either.
I don't think it's what it used to be, but I think it. There's something about it. I'd like to go to. I like Stonehenge, so maybe do the Glastonbury Stonehenge thing.
That's cool. And any advice that you would give to somebody who's looking either at a career change or kind of doing like switching industries? Like how is if you're sort of looking back on what happened at Airbnb, what would you?
I mean, I think I like to call it same seed, different soil. So the different soil for me was I was in the tech industry, although I was also taking my hospitality same seed into an area where they needed to understand my industry. So two thoughts there. Number one is your industry knowledge of your particular industry, especially if it's one that's in the process of being disrupted, can be quite valuable to those who are disrupting, who don't really understand the industry. Number two is you have skills and talents that you probably haven't even valued. I had no idea how valuable my leadership background, leading a company, or my emotional intelligence from being an older person who has built some emotional intelligence over time. how valuable that was in a company full of people, all mostly between age 25 and 30. And so learning, what we taught at MEA is helping people to really see how do you actually figure out what is valuable in your skill set that actually could be used elsewhere. And if people want to learn more without having to come to Mexico to learn that, you can read my book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder.
Awesome. And what's the best way if people want to follow sort of what you're up to?
Sure. There's I have a daily blog. It's free. That's on the Modern Elder Academy website. It's called Wisdom Well. And so every morning you get, if you subscribe, you get a free email from me with a little microdose of wisdom, or a story or something like that. Actually, the social media channel that I use the most is LinkedIn. And it's primarily because I put articles up there and things like that as well. So,
okay. Great.
Yeah.
Good stuff, Chip. Thanks a lot for your time. Yeah, we'll be looking to the Wisdom channel and keep in touch.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Thank you.